Another important piece of the 1920s I want to talk to you about just briefly is entertainment and art. So one of the great pieces of entertainment to come out of the 1920s is, of course, the Harlem Renaissance. Starting in Harlem, New York, in the black community there, it grows across the United States and really across the world. This is a whole movement, and we call it a renaissance or a rebirth of ideas. There is art, paintings and drawings and that sort of thing. There is great music to come out of it. And then, of course, great literature that comes out of this Harlem Renaissance as well. There are all sorts of phases to this. We teach it in the English department here at the university. But there's so many great writers that I hope that you will become aware of and take some time to listen to. People like Zora Neale Hurston, James Weldon Johnson, Claude McKay. These are just some really, George Schuyler, really great artists and writers of the time. And then again, the music and drama and plays and all sorts of things that comes out of this. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of this Renaissance and the beauty of it. And again, I'll have some links for you in our module as well. And then there's other entertainment. So this is going to cross racial lines, this Harlem Renaissance. It's going to be popular all across the United States. And there's other medium of arts and entertainment that become popular in this period too, in part because the technology is finally there. The radio becomes incredibly important in sharing information, sharing ideas, and sharing entertainment. You have people across the country that, again, are listening to the same soap operas that we still have on television today, or maybe just on the internet today. But people are listening to the same thing across the country. Movies become popular in this time period. You have the first talkies in 1927, where everything else had been just a strictly silent film. You start to have the technology where they can layer sound over the film and have some sound in the film of the actors actually speaking. And movies were so popular. You have over 25,000 movie theaters in the United States by 1925. We're going to see this grow exponentially in the 1930s and the 1940s as Americans are using the movie theater for their news and all of their entertainment. Sports are a huge influence in the 1920s as well, and this is going to grow across the United States. College football really gets started in this time period. Baseball, of course, is very big in the 1920s and 1930s, kind of a golden age for baseball. Boxing becomes popular, especially among the immigrant communities of the United States. And another form of entertainment that was really popular in this time is aviation. Today we think of airplanes as something we want to go to Florida, or we want to go to Seattle or wherever, and we go to the airport and get on a plane and get there as fast as we can. Well, in the 1920s and the 1930s, aviation was a huge part of entertainment in the time period. These magazines and newspapers of the time had aviation writers, people who their whole job was the aviation beat. You had air shows. Thousands of people would go to watch an air show. And so thousands of people would watch air shows across the country. And this was also the time period of kind of firsts, right? The first to get to the North Pole, the first to go around the world, the first to do all these things, whether it was on land or in the air. And so you have a lot of competition tied to the aviation, the fastest across the country. You have air races where pilots would fly around pylons, kind of like, car races today where they drive around a track. You would have pilots flying in the air around these big pylons, and thousands of people would go and watch them race. Charles Lindbergh crosses the Atlantic Ocean successfully in 1927. There was a huge contest. This was a huge prize that he was competing for, And dozens of other pilots had tried to achieve the same feat. And of course, Amelia Earhart becomes the first woman to cross the Atlantic just a few years later. So the flying in the 1930s grows even further and becomes even more popular. So these are just some of the different forms of entertainment that were really popular in this decade of the 1920s that built into what we have today, what we think of as entertainment today, whether it's sports or music. Uh, Now we get Spotify or whatever, and but it was the radio in the 1920s and movies and all of those things that we think of today as a important part of entertainment in our lives. They all started in the 1920s. So in the end, what I want you to walk away from this decade understanding is it had those two parallel movements, that retrenchment in society and the idea of those roaring 20s. And many of those same themes that we talk about and think about when we talk about the 1920s are still with us today. That decade is the most familiar to us out of all those decades that we have studied thus far. It is the most similar to us. It's where we can really see the spark of the beginnings of where we've landed today, whatever, for good and for ill, I'm afraid. Okay? Let me know if you have any questions.